At 9:04 a.m. on December 12, 1939, 15 Soviet soldiers patrolled a frozen Finnish forest. It was 40°C. Their thick wool coats were rigid. Frost instantly crystallized on their scarves with each exhale. They belonged to the world's largest military, Joseph Stalin's invincible Red Army. Their mission? To annihilate a nation of farmers in a conflict expected to conclude in 10 days. They were self-assured. They were noisy. Their gear rattled. They detected nothing. They were mistaken. The initial shot was barely audible. A crisp snap, immediately muffled by the snow. The soldier rearmost in the patrol just collapsed. No blast, no scream. He simply vanished. The lieutenant leading them halted. He pivoted. He observed nothing. The next shot followed 3 seconds later. The lieutenant's gaze jerked forward precisely as his radio operator, 200 meters distant, folded. On this occasion, the lieutenant believed he detected the round. A slight whiz right before it struck. Panic erupted. The patrol plunged into the snowbanks, but the snow offered no concealment. It was a killing field. The gunfire continued. Crack. A soldier attempting to ready his machine gun slumped across it. Crack. A sergeant indicating a direction dropped backward. Crack, crack, crack. Inside 3 minutes, 12 men were dead. The 3 terrified survivors did not flee. They remained motionless in the snow for 4 hours, hoping they would be spared. Upon finally dragging themselves back to their own lines, their debrief was incoherent. They reported no muzzle blast, no audible report from a sniper unit, no indication of the shot's origin. It was an apparition, a Belaya smirt, the White Death. What those troopers were unaware of, and what the whole Red Army High Command would soon discover, was that this phantom was no supernatural being. It was a farmer, aged 33. A man so modest, so reserved, he stood merely 5 feet 3 inches, a man who had just initiated a personal war against a vast empire. And he was achieving it using a tactic so basic, so unorthodox, it would alter the principles of modern combat. This is the chronicle of Simo Häyhä, and the straightforward, overlooked adaptations that established him as the most lethal sniper in all of history. To comprehend how one farmer could terrify a military, one must first comprehend the conflict. It was a conflict that seemed unwinnable. A genuine David and Goliath scenario. In November 1939, Joseph Stalin eyed his neighbor, Finland, and issued his ultimatums. He coveted their land, their islands, their military installations. He perceived Finland as a buffer territory, a delay mechanism against a potential German assault. The Finns, under Marshal Mannerheim's leadership, declined. Stalin was incensed. On November 30th, 1939, having orchestrated a false pretense event, the shelling of Manila, the Soviet Union attacked. The disparity in numbers wasn't just a mismatch. It was absurd. The Red Army surged across the border with 1 million soldiers. The Finns, they had 300,000 men, mainly part-time reservists. The Soviets deployed 6,000 tanks. The Finns possessed 32. The Soviets had 3,000 aircraft. The Finns, 114. The world observed with pity. Time magazine declared Finland's situation hopeless. The Red Army's own strategy, deep battle, was predicated on overwhelming might. Political commissars assured the soldiers they would be in Helsinki, Finland's capital, within 2 weeks. They brought their dress uniforms for the celebratory parade. But they had fallen for the classic invaders' error. They studied the numbers on the page, not the page itself, the map. They were attacking in winter, the harshest part of winter. And they were attacking a nation that is 70% woodland. The Finns possessed a term for their national character, Sisu, a kind of obstinate, brave resolve, a cold determination. They understood they could not win a standard war. They couldn't halt the Red Army, so they declined to fight a standard war. They would not challenge the Soviets tank for tank. They would permit the tanks to advance, guide them onto frozen lakes, and then shatter the ice with artillery. They would allow the huge divisions to inch down the scarce, narrow forest roads, and then they would isolate them. Finnish ski soldiers, clad in white, quiet and unseen, would emerge from the woods, obliterate the field kitchens, eliminate the officers, and disappear. This was termed Mahdi tactics. They would sever the extensive, miles-long Soviet columns into smaller, manageable pockets, and then allow the cold to complete the job. The cold was the Finns' most potent ally. At 40 degrees, engines seized. Tank lubricants solidified like concrete. Soviet soldiers, in their ill-suited green-brown uniforms, were stark black figures on a white canvas. They froze to death in the thousands, sometimes upright, their weapons frozen to their gloves. This was the horror the Red Army had entered. And amidst this horror, on the front line at the Kola River, was a short, quiet farmer. Simo Häyhä was not a professional soldier. He hailed from a village named Rautjärvi, near the new border. He was a farmer and an award-winning shooter in the local civil guard. When the war began, he was 33. He was posted to the 34th Infantry Regiment. He saw the Soviet invaders flooding his homeland, and he felt that Sisu. But he also possessed a talent. He wasn't merely a skilled marksman. He grasped the physics of shooting in Arctic conditions. He understood it better than the engineers who drafted the manuals. When he received his rifle, it was a Finnish M2830, a variant of the old Russian Mosin Nagant. It was dependable, it was precise, and it was equipped with standard iron sights. His commander presented him with a new rifle, one featuring a modern Soviet PE-4 scope. Scopes were the future. They allowed a close-up view of the enemy. They magnified the target. Every sniper in the Red Army, the German Army, the American Army, they all desired a scope. Simo Häyhä declined it. This was his first illegal modification, his first deviation from doctrine. To his superiors, it seemed like insanity. To Simo, it was pure logic. This was his piano wire tensioner. The issue wasn't the rifle. The issue was the cold. Simo knew three things that the military sniper academies had not yet fully grasped. Firstly, a scope reflects light. The glass optic, even with a hood, would capture the low-angled winter sun, a minuscule flash detectable from 500 meters in that white frozen wasteland. One glint signified death. His M2830's iron sights were just black metal. No reflection, no death. Secondly, a scope fogs up. The intense cold meeting the heat of a human eye against the eyepiece would instantly produce an opaque mist on the lens. You would lift your rifle, see only white, and need to wipe it. By that time, the target was gone. Or worse, the target had spotted you. Thirdly, a scope requires you to raise your head. To acquire a correct sight picture, a sniper needed to lift his head further from the ground than someone using iron sights, a few extra inches in a flat, snow-covered expanse. Those few inches were the margin between being the hunter and the hunted. Simo retained his iron sights. He knew his effective range was between 150 and 400 meters. He didn't require magnification. He had shot pine cones and fox ears on his farm his entire life. He just required reliability. But that was merely his first adaptation. The others were even more basic and more inspired. The Red Army was adapting. Their snipers were hunting our snipers, and they sought two indicators. The first was muzzle blast. When a high-powered rifle is fired, it displaces the snow in front of the muzzle. It's a small puff of white. To a skilled counter-sniper, it's a giant "shoot here" signal. Simo's answer. He wouldn't just locate a position, he would construct one. He would spend an hour compacting the snow ahead of his rifle, pouring water over it, and allowing it to freeze solid. When he fired, the ice block would absorb the entire blast. The snow wouldn't shift. There was no puff. There was just silence. The next thing they sought was breath. At 40 degrees, Hot human respiration lingers in the air like a plume of smoke. A sniper lying in ambush, breathing heavily from stress, might as well be lighting flares. Simo's fix for this was incredibly simple. It was brilliant. He held his mouth full of snow. He would lie in his frozen hide for hours with a packed wad of snow under his tongue. It cooled his respiration inside his body. When he exhaled, the air was already at the ambient temperature. There was no fog, no plume, no sign. Consider this. An enemy sniper is searching for Simo. He's sweeping the horizon with his high magnification, glinting scope. He's looking for a head raised too high. He's looking for the snow puff. He's looking for the breath cloud. And Simo Häyhä has none of that. He has no scope to glint. His head is lower than the enemy's. His muzzle blast is negated by ice. His breath is invisible. He was, practically speaking, a ghost. He had employed simple farmer's logic, the reasoning of a man who coexists with the cold, to transform into a perfect unseen killing apparatus. And then he got to work. His routine was harsh. He would rise before sunrise. He'd pack his white bread and sugar. He'd don his layered white camouflage. He'd take his rifle, his Suomi submachine gun, and his skis, and he would inform his unit, "I'm going hunting." He would ski unaccompanied deep into no man's land, frequently behind Soviet lines. He'd locate his position, a slight incline, a fallen tree. He'd prepare his hide. He'd pack the snow. He'd place snow in his mouth, and he would wait and wait and wait. The cold would permeate his bones. Most men would shiver, would fidget. Shivering spoils an aim. But Simo had Sisu. He blended with the snow. He was the winter, then a target. A Soviet officer studying a map. 300 meters. Crack. A machine gun crew deploying. 250 meters. Crack, crack. A soldier sprinting for cover. 350 meters. Crack. He avoided firing twice from one spot if possible. He'd shoot, then ski 100 meters, find a new spot, and fire again. The Soviets would saturate the old position with artillery, destroying only trees, while Simo was already targeting them from their flank. At day's end, he'd ski back. His commander, a Lieutenant Utalainen, would ask for the tally. Simo, a man of few words, would just say, 5. The next day, 8. The day after, 12. Initially, the officers were skeptical. The figures were too high. They were unbelievable. No sniper achieves 12 kills in one day. Doctrine held that sniping was a slow, methodical game of 1 or 2 kills. This was the engineering officer from the P-38 story again. The figures didn't align with the manual. So they dispatched an observer with him. The observer returned that evening, his face pale, trembling. He verified every single kill. The farmer was telling the truth. On December 21, 1939, Simo killed 25 Soviet soldiers. On December 22nd, he killed 23. On Christmas Day, 1939, while the Red Army Command was drinking vodka, Simo Häyhä was hunting. His tally for that day, 38. 38 confirmed kills in one day. This wasn't combat. It was a harvest. The Kola front line was a slaughterhouse. The Soviets had 12 divisions, over 160,000 men, attempting to break through. The Finns had 4 divisions. The Finns were outnumbered 4-1. The Soviet general Meretskov hurled waves of troops at the Finnish lines. They were mowed down by machine guns. They were vaporized in Moti ambushes, and they were being stalked by the ghost. Morale in the Red Army collapsed. It is one thing to die by artillery. It is another to be killed by a visible foe. But to be hunted by an invisible entity, it broke their sanity. Soldiers refused patrols. Officers wouldn't leave their bunkers. They would start fires for warmth and crack. The man nearest the fire would drop. They would cluster for protection, and Simo would use his submachine gun, wiping out the squad. He wasn't just a sniper. He was a psychological tool. He had by himself established a half-mile deep no-go area, A whole frontline sector was immobilized by one man and his old rifle. This is the story's turning point. This is the Saburo Sakai moment from the P-38 script. The problem grew too large for frontline officers to conceal. The reports of a Belaya Smirt traveled all the way to the Soviet High Command, to Stavka. Stalin's generals were being mortified. Their vaunted deep battle doctrine, their thousands of tanks and millions of soldiers, were being checked by a few thousand Finns on skis and, according to the terrified reports, by one unkillable phantom. The Red Army could not, and would not, abide this. The man in the P-38 script, McKenna, was a secret. His modification was concealed. But Simo Häyhä, his modifications were now infamous. The Finns dubbed him Taika Ampuja, magic shooter. And the Soviets? They just wanted him neutralized. The directive came from Soviet command. Forget the front line. Forget strategic goals. The #1 priority in the Kola sector was to locate and eliminate this Finnish farmer. They ceased sending regular patrols. It was a waste of personnel. Instead, they gathered their elite. First, they deployed their own sniper teams, the absolute best from the Moscow Sniper Academy. Men with brand new, high-tech scoped rifles. Men who had dedicated their lives to this. Simo hunted them. They would select a spot. Their scope would flash. And Simo, from 400 meters, would place a single iron sight round directly through their optic and into their eye. He dispatched them one by one. It failed. The problem was escalating. So they escalated. If snipers failed, they would use artillery. They initiated a new tactic. Anytime a single soldier was killed by one shot, the entire sector would be saturated with heavy mortar and artillery fire. Hundreds of shells aimed at one suspected location. Simo was caught in this. One day, his position was struck by over 100 shells. The surrounding trees were turned to splinters. The ground became black mud. When the barrage ceased, his commander assumed him dead. An hour later, Simo walked back to the dugout, covered in grime, his white uniform tattered. He had some shrapnel wounds. He just nodded to his CO and remarked, "They were loud today." Then he went back out. The Red Army was now fixated. They were desperate. This one farmer, this 5'3" apparition, was mocking their technology, their numbers, their might. He had killed their best snipers. He had endured their artillery. They needed a new approach. In late February 1940, the Soviet command at Kola formed a special counter-sniper platoon. Not one man, not a team, a platoon. 30 of their top shooters backed by machine gunners with one singular objective: hunt the White Death. Do not return until he is dead. The Red Army, with its millions, was now officially hunting a single man. They were no longer trying to win the war. They were trying to win this one engagement. The hunters were now the hunted. A platoon of elite Soviet killers entered the forest searching for one farmer. What they didn't realize was that they weren't tracking a man. They were tracking a ghost, and this ghost was about to track them back. The platoon entered the forest just after sunrise. 30 of the Red Army's finest, supported by Degtyaryov machine guns. They were hunters with a single target. They advanced in tactical formation, sweeping the trees, their new SVT-40 scoped rifles reflecting the weak sun. They were seeking a man. Simo was seeking targets. He wasn't in the trees. He was concealed in a snowdrift 400 meters from their route. His old M2830 rested on an ice block. He had been awaiting them for 6 hours. He watched them approach. He saw their assurance. He saw their scopes glint. And he saw their heavy, awkward boots breaking the snow. They were loud. Simo waited. He let the first 10 men go by. He let the machine gun crew pass. He aimed for the man at the very rear, the platoon's radio operator. Crack. The sound vanished before the platoon leader even processed it. The radio man fell, a clean hole in his torso. The platoon reacted instantly. They dove for cover. The machine gun team opened up, emptying a 50-round drum into the trees where they presumed the shot originated. They were mistaken. They were firing at a phantom. While they were firing, Simo was already gone. He didn't flee. He skied. Silently, using his white camouflage, he relocated 300 meters to their flank, to a pre-established position he had prepared the day before. He waited. The Soviet lieutenant, believing the sniper had retreated, signaled his men to advance. Warily, they crept forward. Crack. The lieutenant dropped. This time, the shot came from their left. Panic. The platoon was leaderless, and now without a radio. The remaining 28 men were snared. They had no idea where the next shot would come from. They were being hunted. One by one, they hunkered down as darkness fell. The temperature plunged to 35 degrees. They were freezing. They needed a fire. Their training forbade it. Their survival instinct demanded it. A small group of 6 men broke ranks and clustered together, trying to start a small fire for warmth. It was the last error they would make. Simo was 200 meters away, not with his rifle, but with his other weapon, a Suomi KP-31 submachine gun. He materialized from the trees like a wraith and emptied a 71-round drum into the cluster. The engagement was over in 10 seconds. The rest of the platoon, hearing the submachine gun from one direction and still petrified of the sniper fire from another, shattered. They fled in all directions into the blackness, into the woods. Simo didn't pursue. He didn't have to. The forest and the cold claimed them. The next morning, Finnish patrols discovered 27 bodies. The elite counter-sniper platoon was gone. This was no longer a fight. This was a haunting. The psychological dread the White Death inflicted was now more profound than the physical toll. We know this not from Finnish accounts, but from the diaries of Soviet soldiers who opposed him. A soldier named Pavel, in the 75th Rifle Division, wrote a letter to his mother, recovered months later. "Mother, this is not war. This is hell. We do not fear the Finns. We fear the quiet. In our doctrine, quiet means peace. Here, quiet means he is watching. When the artillery ceases, our hearts cease with it. We know he is out there. We know he is looking at us. The quiet is the White Death." Pavel wrote about the rules for survival on the Kola front. Rule 1, you never start a fire. The Finns say, Kola holds unless the men are ordered to light fires. We know this. We choose to freeze instead. Rule 2, you never run to a wounded man. When a man screams, it is a lure. The ghost is watching the body. He is waiting for the medic. He is waiting for a friend. We let our friends die, or we die with them. Rule 3, you never cluster, but you never walk alone. Both are death. Mother, I am not afraid to die. I am afraid of waiting to die. This was the ripple effect of Simo's simple adaptations. His refusal of a glinting scope, his ice block for his muzzle blast, his mouthful of snow for his breath. These were not just tactics. They were psychological torture. He had methodically erased every indication that a human was hunting them. He had become an invisible elemental force of the winter. He was the cold. He was the quiet. He was the White Death. The Soviet command was now in a state of utter panic. Their elite snipers had failed. Their counter-sniper platoon was annihilated. Their artillery barrages had failed. Their frontline troops were nearing mass mutiny. The entire Kola front, a crucial strategic objective, was being held at a standstill, not by the Finnish army, but by the legend of one single farmer. Stalin's generals had one final desperate play. If you cannot kill the man with precision, you kill everything with brute force. The order was issued: grid square removal. The Red Army was no longer aiming at specifics. They were going to systematically obliterate the entire forest, 1 square kilometer at a time. They brought in their largest artillery, 152-meter howitzers, heavy mortars. They stopped waiting for a Finnish move. They just fired, all day, all night. They transformed the pristine white forests of Kola into a black splintered moonscape. The Finns called it the Kola Holocaust. They were firing tens of thousands of shells daily. Simo Häyhä kept hunting. The shelling made it harder, but it also made it easier. The din of the constant explosions masked his own rifle's report. He moved through the craters, a ghost in a desolate landscape. His tally continued to rise. 200, 300, 400. By early March 1940, in less than 100 days, Simo Häyhä's official confirmed sniper kill count was 505, 505 men. That is an entire battalion, eliminated by one man with iron sights, and that figure excludes the 200-plus men he killed with his Suomi submachine gun. He was, without question, the most effective soldier on the planet. The Finnish High Command acknowledged this. They promoted him from corporal to second lieutenant. It was the fastest battlefield promotion in Finnish history. They presented him with a custom-made rifle, a Sako M2830, engraved with his name. He was a national hero, and the Red Army just wanted him gone. March 6, 1940, the 100th day of the war. The Soviets were launching their final, desperate, all-out offensive at Kola. Simo was at his post, as he was every day. But this was not a quiet hunt. This was a full-scale battle. He was firing as fast as he could reload. He had already killed several men that morning. The Soviets had a rough idea of his location. They had been pounding his sector all morning with mortars. And in that chaos, a single Soviet soldier, a counter-sniper, got lucky. We will never know his name. We will never know if he was aiming for Simo or if it was a random shot in the massive engagement. But this soldier fired an explosive round, not a standard one. Simo Häyhä was acquiring his next target when that single explosive bullet, discharged from 300 meters, struck him squarely in the face. The result was catastrophic. Simo registered no pain, just an impact, then coldness. His sight went white, his mouth abruptly filled with warm liquid and shattered teeth. He tried to inhale and couldn't. The bullet had entered his left cheek and detonated inside his mouth. It had obliterated his upper and lower jaw, ripped off his cheek, and devastated the whole left portion of his face. He collapsed into the snow, unconscious, bleeding out. His fellow soldiers, fighting nearby, saw him fall. They rushed to his position, anticipating finding their hero's corpse. What they found was a horror. One soldier later said, "Half his head was gone." They retrieved his body. He wasn't breathing. There was no pulse. The man who became a legend, the man who had held back a military, the White Death was dead. They dragged his body to a pile of other fallen Finns in the rear, a temporary morgue. The ghost was finally gone. The war was nearly finished. The Red Army was at last breaking through. But for Simo, a new war, a battle inside his own shattered body, was just starting. A soldier passing the heap of bodies noticed a leg twitch. He paused. He looked again. The man with the missing face was alive. His name was Simo Häyhä, and he was not dead. He had been found a full week after being shot. He had regained consciousness on the pile of corpses. His jaw was gone. His cheek was gone. But his Sisu, his grit, was intact. He was rushed to a field hospital. The war concluded just days later, on March 13, 1940. Simo was unconscious for the peace treaty. He was unconscious when the guns finally went silent on the Kola front, a front that, despite the cost, never yielded. The Winter War was done. On paper, Finland lost. They were compelled to sign the Moscow Peace Treaty. They ceded 11% of their land. But the Red Army had been humiliated. Stalin's 2-week victory celebration had become a 105-day ordeal. The invincible Red Army, with its millions of men and thousands of tanks, had been fought to a bloody stalemate by a nation of farmers on skis. They took over 1 million casualties. They lost over 3,500 tanks and 600 aircraft, and they had been terrified, paralyzed, and psychologically shattered by one man. A 5'3" farmer with an old rifle. This is the true ripple effect. This is the piano wire that altered the entire war. because Joseph Stalin was not the only one observing. In Berlin, Adolf Hitler observed the Red Army's pathetic display in Finland. He saw a military that was poorly led, badly equipped, and terrified of a few phantoms in the snow. The terror Simo Häyhä had unleashed, the simple adaptation of using iron sights and snow, had assisted in persuading Hitler that the Soviet Union was a decayed edifice, ready to collapse with one hard push. 1 year later, Hitler initiated Operation Barbarossa, the invasion of Russia. Many historians posit that if the Red Army had not appeared so feeble in Finland, if men like Simo Häyhä had not revealed their every weakness, Hitler might never have ventured the invasion. The 505 men Simo killed were just the start. The fear he sowed changed history. But while history was shifting, Simo Häyhä was in a hospital, fighting his own battle. His injuries were so grave, doctors were unsure where to start. He endured 26 distinct, agonizing surgeries. They had to reconstruct his face from nothing. They took bone from his hip to fashion a new jaw. They took skin from his thigh to create a new cheek. He was hospitalized for 14 months. He spent years recovering. When he finally emerged, he was a changed man. The left side of his face was permanently scarred, misshapen. The White Death now bore the war's mark on his own face. But he was a hero. Unlike Sergeant McKenna, whose modifications stayed secret, Simo's deeds were too large to overlook. Marshal Mannerheim himself promoted him and gave him the Cross of Kola. He tried to re-enlist when the war with Russia resumed in 1941, the continuation war, but he was denied. His injuries were too severe. He was a hero, but one too damaged to fight. So what becomes of a man who was the world's deadliest soldier when the conflict ends? What happens to the ghost when the snow thaws? Simo Häyhä didn't go on a victory lap. He didn't author a bestseller. He didn't seek celebrity. He did what the farmer in him always knew. He went home. He was granted a small farm in a new town. His old one was now Soviet territory. He spent the next 50 years doing precisely what he did before the war. He bred hunting dogs. He became one of Finland's most successful moose hunters. His skill, his Sisu, his comprehension of the wild, it never faded. He was a quiet man, a humble man. He seldom spoke of the war. When young reporters would track him down decades later and ask how he became the White Death, he'd just shrug. When they asked if he felt remorse for killing over 500 men, his answer was pure, cold farmer's logic. He said, "I did what I was told to do, and I did it as well as I could." In 1998, a journalist asked him the secret to his success. What made him so skilled? Simo, then 92, offered a single-word reply: practice. James McKenna, the mechanic, had his 6-inch piano wire. Simo Häyhä had his iron sights. Both men identified a problem that the experts and the doctrine had overlooked. The experts saw high-tech scopes. Simo saw a glinting target. The experts saw doctrine. Simo saw snow. The experts saw regulations. Simo saw survival. Simo Häyhä passed away in 2002, aged 96. He was interred in Ruokolahti, a quiet hero in the nation he had saved. He remains to this day the deadliest sniper in human history. That is how wars are truly decided. Not always by grand strategies or huge armies, but by the quiet Sisu of individuals, by a mechanic in New Guinea who defies the rules, and by a farmer in Finland who wields the cold itself as a weapon. If this story captivated you as much as it did us, please pause to like this video. It assists us in sharing more forgotten stories from the Second World War. Subscribe to stay connected with these untold histories. Each one is important. Each one merits remembrance. And we'd love to hear from you. Post a comment below letting us know your viewing location. Our community stretches from Texas to Tasmania. From veterans to history enthusiasts, you are part of something special here. Thank you for watching, and thank you for keeping these stories alive.